Oh,
There you go.
there we go.
There's people that couldn't make it today, so they asked if I could record it. So you're online.
So I'm going to go over just a few slides. We're going to talk a little bit about what ProcellaCOR use we've done so far, and a little bit of what we're planning to do on Lake George, and then I'll allow you to pepper me with questions, and I'll do my best to answer everything I can. So let's see if we can share the screen. Well,
Yep, you're up.
you can see it? Well, that's
Yes.
good. I see something totally different. So I'll be looking sideways a lot. There we go. So ProcellaCOR EC. ProcellaCOR, as Dave mentioned, is a new herbicide. It is similar along the lines of herbicides such as Renovate, which has been approved in the Adirondack Park. It is a systemic herbicide. The difference, one of the bigger differences is it is used at such a lower rate than other similar herbicides, and that is one of the reasons why it got EPA's recommended use category over other herbicides, because it has such a low use rate and has so little effect on human health. So to give you an example, Renovate, which is the herbicide used in the park previously, is used at about 1.5 to 2.5 parts per million. ProcellaCOR is used, or at least our projected use in Lake George, is going to be under 8 parts per billion. So it's significantly lower. We started using ProcellaCOR in New York in 2019. It doesn't impact most native plants, and that's one of the other advantages. So when you go into control milfoil, you can selectively carve out the Eurasian watermilfoil and leave all your native plants in place, and that's pretty critical. It disappears from the water column very rapidly, usually within days, and that again is a big difference. And I was looking at this earlier today. An example of a lake that we used it in is called Cazenovia Lake. It's out by Syracuse. And part of the process, the permitting process, is that we have to predict how far downstream the herbicide will travel. Well, when we were using Renovate in Cazenovia Lake, we had to predict that it would travel 36 miles downstream. When we switched over to ProcellaCOR, that distance was 1/3 of a mile. So that's significantly less notification, significantly less posting, water users that are no longer affected. So it's really been it's kind of sort of like a watershed event, bringing this ProcellaCOR into the market, and it's been fantastic for Eurasian watermilfoil control. We anticipate most of the control is going to last 3 years or better, and that is similar to some of the other herbicides, but not with the same kind of selectivity that we're seeing with this, where we really can just take out the milfoil. It doesn't restrict swimming, it doesn't restrict fishing, it doesn't restrict drinking water. In fact, the maximum application rate on ProcellaCOR is lower than the rate that requires a drinking water restriction in New York. And that's 48 parts per billion. And again, we're using it probably less than 8 parts per billion. So this was our first use in New York, Snyder's Lake, North Greenbush. It's just east of Albany. And what you're seeing on the map here are all these sample points, our plant sampling points in the lake. 52% of those sampling points had Eurasian watermilfoil prior to treatment. And of the sample points, about 70% did support plants. It's a real deep lake. It's got a real narrow shoreline that's vegetated. So we treated this entire shoreline in 2019 with ProcellaCOR EC. And when we came back and did our post-treatment survey, we didn't find any more milfoil. It was all gone. And yet the same 70% of the survey points still supported plants. So again, we just carved out the milfoil. A few other treatments you've probably heard about are our treatment on Minerva Lake in 2020. We treated about 41 acres, so roughly half of Minerva Lake. we took out the milfoil in the season of treatment. We took it out in the season after treatment as well. So the 2021 survey of all the same sites showed that we didn't find any milfoil at those sites. Similar results in Saratoga Lake. We've used it at Cazenovia Lake, Chautauqua Lake, Oneida and Lamoka, and many smaller lakes, particularly over in the area east of Albany. There's a number of small lakes near the town of North Greenbush that we treated. It's been very successful everywhere we've used it. So what we're planning to do this year is 2 pilot projects in Lake George. These sites are each about 4 acres. All right. So very small sites, but very dense sites and very challenging to do with hand harvesting. There's been plenty of research on ProcellaCOR. So the APA has a good knowledge base to work off of. Bob Lombard, who's on the call, did the plant surveys and submitted those as part of the permit application. And so we've submitted applications to the APA and to the DEC, and the DEC permits have already been issued. So we're moving along well in those means. If treatments are approved by the APA, and I think that the April meeting of the APA is when they'll discuss that, then we're probably planning to be out there in early June to do these applications. They'll both be done in a single day. You know, essentially, we'll probably start at the Glen Burnie site. That'll take maybe a 2-hour window, and then move down to the Sheep Meadow Bay site, and another 2-hour window there. So we'll be done within a day. We'll spend the next probably the next week monitoring the residual concentration of the herbicide. That's something that APA requires. So if it's similar to Minerva, what we did there is a 12 and 24-hour sampling, 3-day sampling, 7-day sampling. Typically by the 7-day sampling, there's no residual left. Now, you know, because we're doing small sites in a much larger lake, I suspect by the 3rd day of sampling, we probably will find no measurable concentration of the herbicide left there. Any questions? Yeah, as I said, short presentation, but let's start with questions.
There we go.
Okay.
John Stroud.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, John.
Now, hi, how you doing?
Okay.
Now, you said, which was, I think, dramatic, that even on the day of application, there won't be any restrictions, fishing and swimming and even drinking?
That's correct. Yeah. The state of New York has a 50 part per billion threshold for what they call non-specified contaminants, things that are not on their list. All right. So we're using this at 8 parts per billion. So we're well below that threshold. There's no drinking restriction. The only restriction that is on the label that we're going to deal with is an irrigation restriction. And that is going to be a 1 part per billion threshold. So we'll reach that probably within the 3-day testing.
I do have another question, if I may. The other thing you said is, as far as the target areas, the milfoil target areas, it was quite effective. And then you added that with very little impact on native plants. Now, is that little impact on the adjacent sites to the target area? Or is it little impact even on native plants in the target area?
Even in the target area. Absolutely. Yeah.
Any other questions from folks? Yes.
Yes, I have a question. My name is Dan Gorky. I'm with the Paradox Lake Association. We are, hopefully proceeding with using ProcellaCOR at some time in the near future, but we're confused by the memorandum of understanding between APA, DEC, and APIP, that as we understand it, DEC does not allow the use of ProcellaCOR in any lake that touches state land. We're confused about how to navigate that and what progress, if any, there is on the resolving the confusion with the memorandum of understanding.
Yeah, it's, Dan, I don't think it's specifically land that touches state land, but actually land that is noted as forest preserve. So if the underwater area is forest preserve, that's what triggers the problem. And they're working on that, resolving that issue. I can't say how long that's going to take, but both the APA and the DEC are aware of that. And I think they both are interested in making a revision to that MOA.
I don't know if Joe or Aaron had any involvement or thoughts on that yet, but I know it is a conversation that is ongoing. Sam.
Yes, sir. Glenn, so just to show my ignorance on this subject, so we put the pesticide on, or the herbicide. We put the herbicide on, and so the weeds that are already growing, what happens to them do they just disintegrate? Do they float away? Do they, what happens to them at that point in time? When it
The
dies
Eurasian
off?
watermilfoil is going to be impacted by the herbicide within a couple of days, but then it'll take probably 2 to maybe 3 weeks for it to decompose and just drop to the bottom. Okay.
And Sam, the treatment is so early in the season, and Glenn can talk about this, that the biomass, there's been people that are concerned what happens when you kill off all these plants, because when people picture milfoil, they say, wow, it's up to the surface, they're 10 feet tall, that's a lot of biomass. But one of the reasons that they apply early in the season is the plants are smaller and other plants aren't even up yet. So the biomass is a lot less, and it has less chance also of affecting any other plants. So Glenn, if you had any thoughts.
No, well put, Dave. Yeah, absolutely. Most of your native pondweeds may not even be up at that time. The other question that often comes up is when you take out this biomass, aren't you just adding to the accumulated organic material on the bottom of the lake? And theoretically, yes, you are, but you're adding significantly less than if you allowed the plant to grow and then die later on. So you're pulling it out when it's at a low growth rate, which is actually ideal for the chemical uptake too. The more growth you're having in the plant, the better the herbicide is taken into that plant.
Sam, one of the things that we've been doing is just trying to reach out, not only to get public feedback, but also to say if there's other areas that are interested in this, we'd like to be available with our information to share as much as possible. I know that you guys over in Fort Ann have been working on Hadlock for a number of years. Yeah. And those smaller lakes are really, at least from my limited experience, seem to respond very well. I know Lake Sunnyside in Warren County is looking to do a potential treatment this year. They're working with the DEC. But those smaller lakes that I know you guys have spent considerable money on, those water bodies, like Casiuna could be a prime candidate. Casiuna has been challenged for years with milfoil in Washington County. So it just seems there's when Minerva Lake did the treatment in the Adirondack Park, all of us were kind of keeping an eye on that and saying, how is this going to do? And the results were so exceptional. I was at the town supervisor's presentation on that, and they were just beside themselves with the fact that they treated 41 to 43 acres, and you couldn't find a plant after that. I went out with Lee Walrath from the Adirondack Park Agency kayaking with Aaron Benny-Volrath from APIP. And we were out there 3-4 hours and we could not find a plant. And then Glenn did the follow-up surveys and confirmed that there was no milfoil remaining. This is after many years of them working on hemp harvesting efforts at a cost of $70,000 per year over year. And they did the treatment one time for $27,000, and they didn't have to go and treat the next year. They shouldn't have to go treat this year. So those savings they can put back into the park that they have there on Minerva Lake instead of going into the lake. So not just ecological benefits, but certainly cost as well.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that.
Glenn, is there any location that ProcellaCOR shouldn't be used, or have you had any so-called failures in using it in some location?
We haven't had any failures. Every site is going to be unique. The sites that are always difficult are those sites that are directly in front of a fast flowing stream, where you're going to have dilution from the stream, even in a short period. I haven't seen bad results yet, but that is at least one site that we want to look at closely. Yeah.
Glenn Wayne Butler from the Brant Lake Association. We recently earned the designation of a New York State impaired lake. We've worked with Bob Bombard for over 20 years and have probably spent at least $70,000 to $80,000 per year on hand harvesting. And Tom Wynn, I don't think is on the call today, is I think leading the process with you. Just make sure that I'm clear, earlier in the season is better, just in terms of growing season and being more effective. Our strategy is to treat the 5 worst beds that produce about 85% of the milfoil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the earlier in the season is better, absolutely.
Okay.
ProcellaCOR does give you a bigger window than the comparable herbicides. If you were using 2,4-D or Renovate, that's a much narrower time frame. So you would want to do that in that May, early June. ProcellaCOR is more effective, so it actually works a little bit longer, and you could do it into July. We prefer not to. We prefer to get it done early in the season. Mm-hmm.
And we're not really breaking new ground here in Lake George. I contacted the DEC central office and asked how many ProcellaCOR applications there were in New York State to date. He said approximately 30 in New York State, and that's supplemented by approximately 50 lakes in New Hampshire that have been active since they first got it approved from EPA, and a number of them in Vermont as well. And at least from my research, I haven't found, to answer Ken's question, I haven't found anybody that said we really struggled with it in this location. It didn't work well. We had other challenges. We had non-target impacts. It just doesn't seem to exist. I've been talking to Amy Smagula. She manages the New Hampshire Invasive Species Program, and she's just a wealth of information. So she oversees and permits all of the applications in New Hampshire. And, her job is to be unbiased as a regulator for New Hampshire. And she says it just has been, I can't paraphrase for her, but generally a game changer for some of those lakes, especially that struggle year over year with private fundraising efforts and bake sales and trying to get the money to do the traditional methods. When we're looking at Lake George, I just want people to understand that we're not looking to replace our current diver assisted or hand harvesting methods solely with ProcellaCOR. We see most of our sites are responding very well. Yes, it's expensive, but it is working. We just have some challenging sites that if we do need to move in a direction because some sites aren't responding or our finances are limited to the point we can't address the sites that we need to and they start exploding across the lake, we want to have another tool in the toolbox. And if we have these 2 sites and we can follow those, we're not only an example for our own lake here in Lake George, but also for those other lakes that really want to try to move in this direction and get better control of the milfoil.
How do we notify the surrounding property owners, shoreline owners, and what has been their approval rate or disapproval rate or apprehension rate?
Part of the permitting process requires us to, first of all, model out again how the product dilutes. And so what I did is took a larger area of the lake, figured out where that dilution threshold would be. And so what you have essentially is a 40-acre zone around one treatment area and a 60-acre zone around the other. So then we look at the property owners adjacent to that zone, and we send each of them a letter indicating what we're going to do and allowing them to contact DEC if they have concerns or questions. So that letter was sent out when the permits were submitted. So they've probably reached their 21-day comment period already. DEC apparently did not get anything that was prohibitive, so that's why they issued their permits.
DEC, I talked to Brian Primo. He said he got no comments or responses from anyone, which he found interesting. One thing that we did do, Ken, was we had a Zoom call with the Glen Burnie folks because they reached out to us and said, we got your letter, we'd like to know more. And so Glenn and I got on a call with 5 or 6 Glen Burnie folks, and Peg Olson was kind of the de facto leader of the group on the call. Peg Olson, for those of you that don't know, lives in Glen Burnie, Blair's Bay. She's also the director of the Adirondack Nature Conservancy, and she's the chair of the Lake George Land Conservancy. So she's certainly involved and knowledgeable on environmental issues. And by the end of our half-hour, 45-minute call, I think she understood that, yes, this is not an unreasonable way to move forward. It seems safe and effective. Let's give it a go. So that was our Glen Burnie conference call. We didn't have any response back from the folks in Sheep Meadow Bay, but I think there's only 4 properties around Sheep Meadow Bay that will be affected. So right now, I think we're looking at, it's hard to say that it's heavily supported, but it's certainly, we haven't seen opposition to it. And I think there's a lot of benefit to be gained about what we're trying to do here.
Tell me again when the first year ProcellaCOR was applied. And the reason I'm asking is that we had a very prominent environmentalist include in his reserved remarks, his negative remarks, that he was just worried about a few years later seeing a 2-headed monster come up out of the lake. I mean, factual statement, almost quoting him. How long has it been around, so we know whether that's going to happen or not?
It was first used in the country in 2018. And so a lot of the New Hampshire work was done in 2018. The DEC takes an additional year to go through their own registration process. So we started treatments with ProcellaCOR in 2019 in New York.
Other questions, comments?
And you're not reserved to just this morning for any questions or comments. The Park Commission is there and always will be there. And David's very, very available to answer any questions that anybody has that you'd rather perhaps ask in confidence or just comes to you a little bit later.
Mary Johnson, you had a question or comment?
Hi, yes, I'm here representing Chateauguay Lake, and I was pleased to learn about this meeting from Dan Gorky. I was wondering, has there been any experience of permitting in situations of flow situations, like riverine situations?
We haven't done that with ProcellaCOR yet. There are other products that we use in flow situations. We've used Aquathol, we've used Sonar. But that has not been one of our ProcellaCOR sites yet.
And does Lake George have any issues with forest preserve underwater that would affect your treatment plans?
Not in the 2 treatment areas that we're working in this year. Yeah.
But we do some of the areas that we might be looking at in the future. So we're interested in that conversation that was brought up earlier as well.
I'm curious, Mary is representing Chateauguay Lake. Is anybody from a farther radius than Chateauguay Lake on the call this morning? That's a pretty big circle.
We are going to be hosting. Ben?
I have one more question. Does anybody have any suggestions on how we can motivate the change in this memorandum of understanding and get the thing moving along, or do we just sit back and wait? Is there anything we can do to try to enhance the process?
Just from my standpoint, I know I was speaking with the new president of the Adirondack Lakes Alliance today. I think there's strong interest among a lot of lakes to take a look at this as a possible tool in the toolbox, and engaging the DEC and Adirondack Park Agency collectively is always helpful. And we'd be happy to be a part of that as well, because we have an interest as well. I do know those conversations have been active. I don't know at what level they are at or how long it would take to kind of address these changes. That's really a DEC and APA question. But I think those conversations, reaching out to DEC and APA, especially collectively, would definitely be helpful. And perhaps there's even a call that could be had just to find out the status of it, what that restriction is, whether it's legislated or something else that could be changed. So yeah, I think reaching out to those organizations, especially collectively, would be very helpful.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments, thoughts? Okay, well, like Ken had mentioned, if you do have follow-up questions, thoughts, or anything else, reach out to me at any time. I'm easy to get a hold of here at the Park Commission, and we can chat about this. If anybody wants to find out how it went after the follow-up, we still have yet to get our proposals in for the treatment and get our APA permit, but we hope that does happen in April, and we're going to keep moving forward. I would be happy to be kind of a repository for information. We've been paying attention to other water bodies that are going through this process and try to bring people together and better understand this. I think it's a benefit to all the lakes that we're looking at as a possibility. So any final thoughts, questions? Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for your participation. We hope it was helpful.
Excellent.
Bye.
All right. Thank you all. Okay. Have a great day. Bye-bye.